Welcome back to another edition of Dig Sports. I'm Andrew Alexander alongside Dig Sports editor Trey Mongrue. Trey, the Tigers finally got that SEC victory they've been longing for.
Finally, yeah.
They won at Florida in the Swamp, 30-27. Some last-second heroics by Kobe Delahousse, my man, my boy.
Came back after missing the extra point.
See, I was wrong about him kicking the 5 field goals, but he got it done. He was the hero anyway. So, Trey, what did you see that you liked from the Tigers last Saturday?
Well, it was definitely a game, especially in that fourth quarter where it seemed like nobody wanted to win. However, it was on the road in the SEC, and especially coming off of an Auburn game where LSU just got shellacked by a team that was clearly better than them on the road. LSU easily could have just mailed it in for the rest of the season. They didn't do that, and I know Florida's down this year, but anytime you get a win on the road in the SEC, that can only mean good things going forward.
Without a doubt, you got to like Leonard Fournette. He probably played the game of his life in college. Had, a $140, 2 touchdowns, got the rock almost 30 times. I mean, Leonard Fournette, this was probably his coming out party, and now Miles has named him the starting quarterback moving forward. Anthony Jennings didn't play a bad game. He played a manageable game, kind of what you were hoping from a Jennings or maybe a Harris this season. Just a guy that could manage the game and minimize mistakes. No turnovers for the Tigers. And Trayvon Durrell, although he only had 2 catches, probably 2 of the biggest catches of the season. He gets open on the 3rd and long, and then obviously that one-handed catch in the end zone was pretty incredible stuff.
Well, and you mentioned, well, first we'll start with Fournette, and that reminded me a lot of what Jeremy Hill did 2 years ago at South Carolina, where, before that you had Spencer Ware, Michael Ford, and Hill, plus even McGee. They were all splitting carries. And then in that game, Hill really took the lion's share of the load, and from that point on, he was clearly the alpha dog of the running back core. I think we'll see the same thing with Fournette there. One thing that I really liked about him was that he was very patient with the way he was running the ball. He allowed the offensive line to open up holes, and then once he found those holes, he hit them hard. That touchdown run where he dragged a couple guys into the end zone, that's a true freshman that did that. That's what I think is most impressive, is that this guy is still maturing as both mentally and physically. He could only get better.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the lights came on for him. And I think the lights came on earlier for Malachi Dupree. The lights have come on for other freshmen throughout the year. And Brandon Harris, those lights will come on eventually, and so Tiger fans, do not worry. We're sure. I don't think we've seen the last of Harris this season. I think he's going to come back at some point. I think Jennings is going to struggle in some game. Maybe it's this game, maybe it's a couple games down the road, but I think we're going to see Harris this season.
I think right now that they still view Harris as a guy that eventually down the road he will be the number 1 quarterback. However, with the way they called the game last week with Jennings as the quarterback, they were calling much of safe routes. You saw, wheel routes out the backfield to Melvin Jones of all people. You saw a couple routes over the middle to Trey Quinn. They didn't really go deep that much. And I think with the way Fournette's running, they can afford to do that. And Jennings right now is a guy that he protects the ball a little bit more than Harris at this point. Harris probably has the better tools. However, Jennings is more experienced, I guess, although not by much. And I think with him, they feel a little bit more safer at this point.
Yeah, not doing too bad. 6-1 as a starter, so he's still doing all right. Trey, obviously we mentioned a lot of great things that happened. What are some of the things that, because it wasn't a great game, the Tigers barely squeaked it out. So what are some things that you didn't like that the Tigers still need to work on heading into the season?
I think you have to look at the defensive side of the ball, and I know we've been doing that a lot lately. But the fact that they made Jeff Driscoll look like a competent quarterback, he was completing some pretty good passes. He was running the ball. Driscoll didn't really do that against other defenses. And Rashard Robinson, 2 games in a row, he's kind of been picked on a little bit, and it seems like almost Jalen Collins might be the better option at this point. Robinson definitely has more talent, but something's off with him right now. And coming up against a Kentucky team that really likes to throw the ball around, Robinson's going to have to get it right because the LSU secondary is really going to be tested this weekend.
When you mentioned Kentucky team, which has kind of been the surprise at the conference, them and Mississippi State, but I think people knew Dak Prescott. They knew what was there. That there was some talk of dark horse Heisman aspirations. But Patrick Towles at Kentucky have kind of come out of nowhere, had a shocking victory where they just beat down South Carolina in the 4th quarter a couple weeks ago. And really, Patrick Towles has been, star quarterback, a dual threat kind of guy. But JoJo Kemp, when they put him, that running back in the Wildcat, that's almost unstoppable. And for a team that struggled so much up front like LSU on defense, stopping any kind of semblance of a running quarterback, what kind of problems does a team like Kentucky present for LSU this week?
Well, they run the spread, and LSU's obviously had a lot of trouble with the spread, particularly in the trenches where the defensive line gets no pressure. And the thing about Towles that I'm most impressed is that he hasn't locked in on one guy. He has guys like Ryan Timmons, DeMarcus Robinson, Dorian Baker, Garrett Johnson. He has 5 receivers that are averaging over 30 yards per catch. And then of the 10 touchdowns he's thrown this season, no receiver has more than 2. So he really likes to spread it around. That means, this LSU secondary can't key in on one guy. They got to be ready for anybody.
Trey, another area that was kind of concerning against the Gators was special teams for the Tigers. You had a missed extra point. More importantly, you had the blown punt coverage. Andre DeBose ran all over the Tigers. He scored the touchdown, had another long return later in the game. Is this a trend, or is this maybe just that was the outlier?
I think it's more of an anomaly in the sense that, DeBose is probably one of the best kick return, punt return specialists LSU's going to see this season. I mean, he was one of the best when LSU saw him back in 2010 when he returned that kick return for a touchdown in the fourth quarter. It was a little concerning that LSU continued to punt to him because it's almost like, beating your head against the wall and expecting a different result. However, like I said, though, DeBose is one of a kind. Kentucky does have a guy like Demarcus Robinson who he's only averaging 9 yards on punt returns this season, so I don't think that'll be a big issue going forward. Jamie Keene, the good news there is that he doesn't seem to really be having the yips like he used to have in the past. He's consistently hitting 45-plus yard punts, so I think, going forward, they'll be all right.
And Kobe Delahousse, obviously, 5 for 5 field goals, still keeps that streak. 1,000%, LSU the only team that has not missed a field goal yet this season. We talk about good things that happen on special teams, bad things. There's a lot of good things that happen for LSU's offense. And moving forward, LSU's probably one of the best things they've done is they control the clock for most of the game in the SEC play, and they've taken care of the ball. Only 1 turnover in SEC play for the Tigers. They're third in the conference in turnover margin at +8, right behind Kentucky, I might add. And so that's a combination of LSU, Jennings, and Harris taking care of the ball very well, and the defense grabbing those turnovers. Is this something is the turnover margin going to play a big factor, you think, against the Kentucky Wildcats this week?
Definitely, because you look at what Kentucky secondary has done. They've forced 11 interceptions this year. 3 have gone back for touchdowns. And, the last we saw Jennings back in New Mexico State had those issues where he was throwing a bunch of, interceptions. Going forward now, I think LSU knows a better game plan with Jennings at the helm. They're going to run the ball a lot because, Kentucky's a team that against South Carolina, against Florida, they've given up more than 200 yards rushing. So I don't think LSU's going to have to throw the ball that much, but when they do, they got to be wary of that secondary.
And you got to be wary of Bud Dupree, the active SEC leader in sacks with 19 right now. This guy is a flat-out animal. He's the one that won the South Carolina game for him. He snagged the ball out of the air and scored it for that go-ahead touchdown. So he's a guy that LSU's typically had in the past, so the Alabama's had, but now he's playing for Kentucky. And what's incredible about this Kentucky team, the turnaround they've had, 67% of their points are been scored by players that weren't on the team last year or didn't play last year. So I mean, the quarterback's a sophomore, the running back's a sophomore, a lot of infusion of talent. This Kentucky team is built, not only for this season, but also the future. So it's going to be a great contest. It's not going to be a rollover game like LSU may be accustomed to. It's going to be a dog-out, drag-out fight. And before we put the Florida game to the books, Trey, who are your winners and losers from last week's game?
Winners, I'm going to go Leonard Fournette. The fact that he was able to once again get the lion's share of the carries and, continue to build off what he's doing. He's looking like a premier back in the SEC at this point. Also give a shout-out to Anthony Jennings as well. It wasn't a clean game by him by any means. However, to come back from what he did against New Mexico State where he basically, lost the starting job, to come back and give LSU, a little bit consistency at under center, it was good for him going forward. Losers, as much as it pains me to say it, because I did like the guy when he was at LSU, Will Muschamp's career at Florida seems to be coming to an end. It seemed like that was his one opportunity to really, get right back on track. Now, losing against an LSU team that was winless in conference before that, it doesn't look good for Muschamp after the end of the season, especially with the way former offensive coordinator Dan Mullen is performing at Mississippi State.
My loser, and it's going to shock you, is actually Colby Delahousse.
Missed an extra point.
He missed the extra point. What you doing, man? Come on. But then my winner is also Colby Delahousse.
I like where
he makes the 50-yarder, but he can't make a 10-yarder. So I don't know. It's one of those things that's like you totally redeem yourself at the very end. So that's great. So Colby Delahousse, keep doing your thing. 5 for 5. And Trey, before we let you go, what's your prediction for the game this week?
Kentucky is 5-1, and as funny as it may sound, they have a legitimate shot to be a contender in the East this year. They get Georgia at home. However, those 5 wins all been at home. And although they should have beat Florida on the road, still lost. This is only the second time they're going to play on the road this season. I'm not sure this team, like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of new players on this team that I'm not sure they're ready for an LSU environment, even if the crowd's only at 95,000. I think LSU wins 27-13.
I'm going to say 24-21. They're going to keep it close. This is going to be a big test for Anthony Jennings. Can he continue the momentum over? So I'm Andrew Alexander. This is Dig Sports editor Trey Mongrue. Check out all your LSU coverage at digbatonrouge.com.